Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Sunday, January the 7th, 2018, TowerGate Day 304. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for all you new subscribers and all you folks maybe watching a TowerGate video for your first or second or fifth time or something. Welcome to TowerGate. Well, it is January the 7th, 2018, and that happens to be my birthday. Got to show you this birthday card I got from my mom. Good old mom. Son, hope your birthday rocks. Mom knows I like to rock. All right, and we're going to rock on some TowerGate today. Wow, got some explosive information both today and tomorrow, an even bigger bombshell. So today I want to talk about this part one of the newest SonofNewo video. And I've had plenty of time. I've watched it twice, taken some notes, done a little research on my own. And so we're going to talk about this really extraordinary deep dive that SonofNewo has taken into three central players in this whole scam. And he's discovered some things that I think are going to give us a really different view of the role these three individuals may have played. Those being George Papagalopolis, Alexander Downer, the Australian diplomat, and Joseph Misfud, which is the individual who was alleged to have given Papadopoulos the information that the Russians had Hillary's hacked emails. So SonofNewo goes into a deep dive into these guys' background, and I think you're going to be very surprised at what we learn. But before I get into that, just something I talked yesterday about. I wanted to send Jim Jordan an email and let him know how much I appreciate him. But, you know, I guess if you tried to do that, you found out what I found out, which is that when you go to his congressional website, he only takes emails from people in his district. So if you're outside of his district, you can't send him an email. But you can call him, you know, but his congressional office, but you can't send an email, which is actually very good because that means he probably reads and responds to him, maybe himself or certainly his aides do. Unlike my congressman, when I send my congressman an email, 30 seconds after I send it, I get an email back just basically thanking me, and then it just gives me a bunch of propaganda about what he stands for, blah, blah, blah. Never addresses any of my question. I don't think they even read my emails if I email my congressman. It generates a response, email, and that's the end of it. I don't think he even reads emails. So I would say that Jim Jordan's office probably does, and that's why he limits it to just people in his district. But you can call him. But anyway, let's move on to this issue with the deep dive into the background of these three individuals by the SonofNewo. Now, as most of you know from following my TowerGate videos, a couple of days after we learned that George Papagalopolis had been charged with making false statements to the FBI, and then we learned he agreed to wear a wire to cooperate with the Mueller investigation. Just what I could find out at that time about Papagalopolis, I said that I think this guy looks a lot like a mole or a plant. And that's been my position since we learned about Papagalopolis lying to the FBI, wearing a wire, and cooperating with the Mueller investigation. So that's been my position since then. Just something stinks about George Papagalopolis. And I've been believing he's some kind of a mole or a plant now since that point. But let's go a little deeper here and look at these three characters, and I think we're going to get a slightly different view of what's going on here. So let's begin with Alexander Downer. Now, he's the individual who is the Australian diplomat who apparently was told by George Papagalopolis in a bar in the UK that, actually it was Papadopoulos that told Downer that he had heard that the Russians had dirt on Hillary, these emails. At which point, about 2.5 months after getting this information, Downer contacts someone in the U.S. government and tells them about this conversation he had with Papagalopolis. This is the story that we're being told. But we now know that Mr. Downer held a position which is equal to the Secretary of State between 2008 and 2014. Downer also worked for a private intelligence firm called Hackloot. They were created by former MI6 agents and journalists and ex-government people in intelligence. Very much like Christopher Steele's Orbis. In fact, they're competitors in London. They both are ex-spooks who are in private intelligence, do political espionage. It's pretty much what they do. They're highbrow, high-dollar, dirty tricks guys. And on whose behalf was Downer acting on? The Australian government or Hackloot? Because he was this former official for the Australian government, but at the same time, he's also very much involved with this private intelligence firm, which is essentially very much almost identical to Orbis and even very similar to Fusion GPS. So you have to ask, when he's having this conversation in the bar with Papagalopolis, is he having that conversation as an Australian diplomat, or is he having this conversation as an operator, someone who works for this private intelligence firm? It's a very good question. Downer held office during the time that he held that office for 11 years, which covers the time in which Bill Clinton, Slick Willie, was president, and also during the time that the Rotten Reverend Clinton was the senator from New York. It also turns out that Downer knows the Clintons quite well. He's seen in photographs with them. Downer also directed a $25 million payment to the Clinton Foundation on behalf of the Australian government when he was in his official capacity, which is a diplomatic position equivalent to the Secretary of State. So Clinton knows Downer. Downer meets with Papagalopolis. Does anyone smell a rat? So May of 2016, Downer is getting toasted in a bar with Papagalopolis in the UK. Here is Papagalopolis, a 28-year-old campaign volunteer, and Papagalopolis is filling in Downer, a veteran intelligence guy and Secretary of State. Now, how much sense does that make? Here you have Papagalopolis. He's a 28-year-old guy who's never really been involved, as far as we know, inside the government and intelligence or anything like that, talking to a veteran of intelligence, a former person in the Australian government who's equal to the Secretary of State, who has all kinds of intelligence ties and information and things and such. And he is having this conversation with a guy like George Papagalopolis in a bar in the UK. You have to wonder, first of all, how did even Papagalopolis even get, even an opportunity to get close to this guy or talk to him? And why would a guy like Downer, a spook like that, have an open conversation with Papagalopolis in a bar like that? What would bring these two together? How did Papagalopolis find himself in that kind of a circle? Papagalopolis, as it appears, knew, talked to, or met with 4 of the 5 sources cited in the dossier. Think about that. Papagalopolis knew or talked to or met with 4 of the 5 sources cited in the dossier. Papagalopolis spoke to source D, Sergei Milian, in 2016. He spoke to source E, Boris Epstein, also in 2016. He spoke to Russian national Ivan Timoviv, known as Source A, or likely Source A. And, of course, Professor Misfud, who is believed to be Source B. Was Downer working with Steele, or working for Fusion GPS, or maybe the Clintons themselves? Who was Papagalopolis working for? As SonofNewo infers, Papagalopolis was a spy. He was working for somebody. So I knew he was some kind of a plant or a mole, but it appears that Papagalopolis may have been more than just a mole or a plant. He may have been a spy, and he was working for someone. We also found out about this, thanks to the SonofNewo, this place in Italy called Link University. It's in Rome. It is a spy school. It's where the world's top spies go to learn their craft. You also have journalists who go there and government officials. It's also a place where they have these consortiums, these meetings. These professional spies and people like that come and give lectures. And they meet there and they discuss information and share techniques and things and such. It's the place to be if you're a spy or a wannabe spy in this world. And we are learning now that we have photos of George Papagalopolis at Link University in Rome, in the picture with Joseph Misfud. We also know from what we learned back in the summer of 2016 that it is in Rome is where Christopher Steele met his man in Rome, and that is where the handoffs of the memos occurred. This is where Christopher Steele was able to meet with his man in Rome and give them the memos that would later make up the full 35-page dossier. It's also where Joseph Misfud lectured and hung out and probably taught. It's also where Papagalopolis spent some time, in the exact same time that Christopher Steele was feeding these memos to his man in Italy. Papagalopolis was there with Misfud at Link University in Rome. All three of these characters were in Rome, Italy at the time that all of this was happening. Coincidence, you think? On March the 15th, Papagalopolis met with Joseph Misfud at Link University, and there is a pic to prove it. And Papagalopolis testified to Uncle Bob, the executioner, to that fact. So we know it is true. Steele handed off the memo to his man in Europe in 2016. Now it could have been March, June, or September, or all of the above. Who was Steele's man in Rome? We are going to find out. Yes, we will. Is it possible it was Papagalopolis? Why is a low-level volunteer campaign aide hanging out with high-level spooks? Why would high-level spooks and people like that hang out with a guy like Papagalopolis? Well, they wouldn't. No evidence that Papagalopolis told the Trump campaign anything about the stolen emails, ever. And he says he did not. Well, isn't that interesting? He's working for the Trump campaign. He learns, according to his statement from Joseph Misfud, that the Russians have dirt on Hillary in the form of emails. He's passing this information to an Australian diplomat who sits on it for 2.5 months. He's spreading it all around. His buddies are spreading it all around, but he never takes the time to give this information to anyone in the Trump campaign. Why not? How much sense does that make? None. Papagalopolis says he got the information from Joseph Misfud. That's what he told Downer, but he never told the Trump campaign. What if it becomes an undisputable fact that the dossier was pure fiction, a story created to give cover for the surveillance and unmasking, and later the frame-up on Trump to bring about his downfall? What if none of this stuff in the dossier ever even happened? The whole story just a fabrication. It's looking more and more like the dossier came after the fact that the surveillance and unmasking had already happened, and that the dossier had to be fabricated to provide cover after Mike Rogers of the NSA discovered the activity and shut it down. We'll get more into that tomorrow. The conversation that happened in May of 2016 likely had more to do with the hot topic of that time, which was Hillary Clinton's 33,000 missing emails. And that it was not a prediction of future hacks. And CrowdStrike, of course, had already been brought in by the Clinton lawyer, Mark Elias, to create the myth that the Russians were responsible for the hack. So this goes kind of to that point that they tried to make in the New York Times, that Papagalopolis has this conversation with Misfud. Misfud says, hey, the Russians have these emails, blah, 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 blah. And at this point, Papagalopolis goes to Mr. Downer and gives this information to him as if it's a prediction of the fact that the Russians are going to hack or they have hacked or what have you. But actually, when we go back and look at the real-time events that were playing out, at the time that this conversation took place between the alleged conversation between Papagalopolis and Mr. Downer, at that time, the hot topic of the day that everybody was talking about was the fact that the Right Reverend Clinton had 33,000 missing emails. That is most likely what prompted Mr. Misfud, and that he was not actually making any great prediction about future hacks, but was talking about probably the 33,000 missing emails, and that possibly the Russians may have them. That's most likely what was going on there. And the New York Times told us that Carter Page, back in April, was the one, that he was the catalyst for the investigation into Trump-Russia. That's what the New York Times put in their story, their headline big bombshell story. Back in April of 2017, they told us that Carter Page was the catalyst for the Trump-Russia investigation. But now they come up with this new piece last weekend telling us it was all Papagalopolis who was responsible for launching the Trump-Russia. Now, we can see from the dossier that the most common person that is mentioned and talked about the most in the dossier is Carter Page. Not a single word about Papagalopolis. Papagalopolis was never mentioned by James Comey in the January 6th briefing to President Trump at Trump Tower. Papagalopolis never even came up on the radar screen of the head of DNI, James Clapper, who said he hadn't even heard of Papagalopolis. None of anything of Papagalopolis' activities found their way into any of the FBI memos, or the CIA, or the Director of National Intelligence. He apparently didn't come up in any of the NSA wiretaps or anything like that. That is very, very strange, and that requires deeper thought. It requires more investigation, asking some more questions, but it's starting to look to me like I agree with the SonofNewo. Kind of half of his argument and mine put together kind of brings me to where I am now. I believed that Papagalopolis was some kind of a plant or a mole, but now when we can see from the hard work of SonofNewo, the good work from SonofNewo, that he was much more than just a 28-year-old volunteer. He obviously hangs out with a lot of spies. He goes to the world's most renowned spy school and hangs out and has conversations with people who are deep players in the intel community, the deep state, the global deep state. These are global players. The FBI knew all about Papagalopolis' trips to the UK and Italy in July of 2016. They knew all about it, yet they never put it in any memos, any reports, didn't show up in a dossier or anything. You have to ask yourself why. They're looking at Carter Page. They're surveilling Carter Page. They're getting information on Carter Page. He's dropped in the dossier as being the main player that was organizing behind the scenes to put together this alleged plot. But at the very same time that all this is going on, you have Papagalopolis involved in all his activities in Italy and in the UK, and the FBI knows all about it. Yet they have no interest in Papagalopolis. That's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. It's not an accident, do you think? Would the FBI just accidentally forget to enter into their record, into their notes, into their investigation, Papagalopolis, when they're quite aware of who he is and what he's doing? I mean, he's in the Trump campaign as a volunteer. Why does Carter Page draw so much attention and Papagalopolis draw none? And we also have to remember that it was Carter Page who got the surveillance launched on him and not Papagalopolis. Sounds to me like Papagalopolis was being protected, like he was working for someone. and someone who was on the team as part of the deep state coup. He was more than just a mole or a plant. He was actually a player, part of the spy network, involved in the plot, working from the inside. That's what the evidence is showing me right now. When will the corporate deep state-owned media and their liberal lapdogs finally start reporting the truth? That's a question a lot of you are asking, so I'm going to answer it for you now. Well, they are right now sharpening their knives. They know it's coming. But they will turn when the facts prove that there is undeniable evidence that the Obama administration and the rotten Reverend Clinton led a coup attempt against President Trump. And it's coming when there is undeniable evidence of this fact. That is when that worm will turn. Now that Nunes and Grassley have access to the evidence, we are going to learn the following probably within the next 30 days. We are going to learn of the unlawful exoneration of the rotten Reverend Clinton by political operatives in the DOJ and the FBI. We are going to learn about the unlawful destruction of evidence and the malfunction of the investigative protocols, the manipulation of the investigative protocols of the FBI and the DOJ to gain specific and pre-planned political outcome. So let's go over that one more time. Kind of botched it. Let's try it one more time. We are going to learn about the unlawful destruction of evidence and the manipulation of the investigative protocols by the FBI and DOJ to gain a specific and pre-planned political action. That is a conspiracy to obstruct justice. As a result of that, Peter Benstrokinus, Lisa Page, and Andy McCabe are going to jail. We are going to learn about the unlawful use of the FISA court for political spy operations by the DOJ, the FBI, and especially that little secret division of the DOJ, the NSD, the National Security Division. We are going to learn about the unlawful use of the Department of Justice, NSD, for weaponized political benefit, and the following people are going to jail. Sally Yates, Silly Sally, along with Loretta, she ought to be lynched, Bruce Orr, they're all going to jail. We will learn about the unlawful use of the FBI Counterintelligence Division for weaponized political benefit. This will send James, the filthy James Comey, to jail, along with Andrew McCabe, Peter Benstrokinus, Lisa Page, and James Baker, all going to jail. We will learn about the unlawful use of a special counsel, Mueller, the unlawful use of a special counsel investigation to hide or cover up the conspiracy. Going to prison will be James Baker, Peter Benstrokinus, Lisa Page, Bruce Orr, Andrew Weissman, Jeannie Rhee, and Aaron Zebley, who are all involved in the unlawful use of a special counsel to cover up the crime. As you can see, many of these people will be facing multiple count indictments. These are the things that we're going to learn in the next 30 days now that Nunes and Grassley have access to all the witnesses, all the documents, unredacted, all the memos, and the whole 9 yards. And we're not even getting involved in the this does not even deal with the email or the Clinton Foundation, which are now both back front and center in investigation. This is just dealing with what happened at the DOJ, the FBI, and probably the intel community as well will be involved in these things. This is what we are going to learn, my friends. It may take a while to unravel, but when we do unravel it, that's what we're going to find out. And that's what's going to happen. Mark my words. Some people say it will never happen. You're right, normally it doesn't happen. They normally walk. Not this time. Too much evidence, too big a crime, too many people looking at it, too many people bound and determined, highly motivated, and, quite honestly, terribly frightened. I mean, this was a deep state coup. And Nunes and Grassley know it, along with Jordan and Gates and Rand Paul and many others. Even Candy Pants Lindsey Graham Can't look the other way on this one. And his good buddy, Senator Magoo, he's up to his eyeballs in it. Likely he'll be dead before this thing shakes itself out, based on what we're learning about his condition. Because this probably will take some time. It's a big criminal conspiracy. It's going to take some time to unwind it. Watergate took 2 years and 10 months. This is 10 times, 1,000 times bigger than Watergate. It will take a lot more time to unwind. But it will unwind, and all the things that we just talked about are what's going to happen. So basically what we have here from the SonofNewo is he took what I originally believed when I heard about Papagalopolis, and I said, okay, there's something going on here. This guy's got to be a plant. This guy, because what's he doing on the campaign? He's spending all his time trying to arrange meetings with Russians. Why would he be doing that? He's a low-level volunteer staffer, and they kept ignoring him. He sent 18 emails to the highest level peoples around Trump. Manafort, he sent these emails to Kushner, and at one point, Manafort, after getting a dozen emails from this guy about meeting with Russians, told someone, email back, we've got the email. Who is this guy sending me all this stuff about meetings with Russians? Tell him this is no way. This stuff's not going to happen. Somebody tell this guy to get somebody some coffee or something. Tell him to get busy doing something else. So we also learned from the SonofNewo that Papagalopolis is sharing this information about the Russians having these emails or having this dirt, yet he never shares it at all with anyone in the Trump campaign. That's mighty curious. We find out that he's hanging out at a spy school, and we find out that Mr. Downer is not just your mild-mannered Secretary of State type diplomat from Australia. No. He's part, just like Christopher Steele, of a deep state type private intelligence firm that does basically dirty tricks for political campaigns. You pay these guys just like Orbis, just like Fusion GPS, and this company that he worked for, they're all the same. They all do the same thing, and here we have them all together. Now, we also find that Papagalopolis is in Italy at the same exact time that the memos are being handed off. That's where he's talking to Misfud. That's what we learned from Christopher Steele, that he's meeting with his man in Italy. So we now have to wonder, who is his man in Italy? Could it have been Papagalopolis? And why is Papagalopolis, if he's at the very heart and deep into all this stuff, why does he never show up in any memos? He never shows up in the dossier. None of this ever shows up. We don't even hear about Papagalopolis until one day when we hear on the news that he's been charged with lying to the FBI and giving false statements, and then we find out he's agreed to wear a wire, and now all of a sudden it looks like he's this real player, a guy that for the past year and 3 months had never been mentioned. And all of a sudden he comes out of the woodwork, and we find out that he's been in contact with 4 of the 5 sources of the dossier. He's hanging out with people who own these private intelligence firms who are probably very well connected. You know, Christopher Steele has to know Mr. Downer, not because of him being an Australian diplomat, but because he works for a private intelligence firm that does the exact same thing that Orbis does in London. They're both in London, and they probably work together. Maybe Fusion GPS also hired Mr. Downer. Maybe Christopher Steele hired Mr. Downer. Maybe the Clintons hired Mr. Downer, because we now know that he knows them well. He's donated to the foundation. He was in his office when Bill Clinton was president, and when Clinton's the Rotten Reverend was the senator. You see, all these people are connected in a cabal, and it's just the point that SonofNewo makes, is that when you look at all these people, they are all in this cabal together. And anyone outside of it is just outside the perimeter, and there's nothing going on. All this was held very, very tightly together with a relatively small group of players, and everything was kept within this group. Papagalopolis didn't go to the Trump campaign and say, hey, I just found out from my buddy Joseph Misfud over in Italy, who's a spy and hangs out with spies, and he told me that the Russians know where those 33,000 emails are, or they may have them, and that they've got dirt on Hillary. But he never did. He never did. He tried to get Trump people to have meetings with Russians, but they never were interested. So maybe that is why, when that failed, and all these efforts to get Trump people to have meetings with Russians, which is probably why Papagalopolis was sent in as a mole to try to get Trump people to meet with some Russians to help support their story. When none of them would cooperate and do that, then they went to their plan B, which was to set up the meeting at Trump Tower. And who was involved in that? Mr. Goldstone, associate of Fusion GPS. And look at the people he runs around with. Same people. So it's possible, and certainly looks very likely, that that meeting at Trump Tower was a setup, which we've been talking about that for a very long time. So now as you look at the background of Mr. Misfud, a guy who hangs out at the spy school in Italy, teaches there, lectures there, has this conversation with Papagalopolis. Then we have Mr. Downer, who turns out he also is involved as a employee, maybe part owner of his own private intelligence firm that does dirty political tricks and political campaigns and does intelligence and things and such. And we found out who his connections are and the fact that he knows the Clintons. All these people we learned before. Last weekend, we learned that Christopher Steele worked for Hillary Clinton's State Department, wrote over 100 memos on the Ukraine situation. So all these people are connected in a cabal, and they're all connected to Clinton. They're all connected to Clinton, and they're all connected to each other. This was a very tight cabal, is what this was. That's why I say, if you look at the dates and you look at the timelines, it's looking more and more like they had been running this surveillance and unmasking on Trump and his team members. Then at some point, Mike Rogers at the NSA, his people discover that these unmaskings are going on. They report it to Rogers. That he says, uh-oh, this is a problem. This is not constitutional. You can't do this. So he goes and blows the whistle on it to the FISA court, and it orders his people to stop allowing these unmaskings. This causes the players inside the cabal to freak out. And so now they have to have something to cover their ass. They need some reason, for some justification for why they were doing what they're doing. So they cook up the dossier. They cook up the dossier. And now it's unraveling. This is why I say that the dossier may be nothing more than a complete piece of fiction, and that all these people were nothing more than people who were just paid to go along with it, never believing that they would ever have to face any questions about it or any follow-up investigation about it, because the rotten Reverend Clinton was supposed to win. They weren't what they were concerned with creating the dossier was simply to be able to cover their ass for the illegal unmasking and surveillance they had been doing. That was why they created the dossier. It was never meant to have to stand the scrutiny of congressional hearings, of investigations, or anything else. It was only meant to satisfy probably oversight people, maybe the Inspector General or something like that, to satisfy them that the surveillance and unmasking was warranted because they had this intel, when in fact, so that looks like the dossier was created simply to cover their ass because they had gotten themselves into trouble by illegally surveilling and unmasking. But once Hillary lost the election, then the dossier had to be used as the subject to get more surveillance and to create this Trump-Russia narrative to try to destroy his presidency, to try to take him down and have a deep state coup, because they knew if this story ever got really investigated, it would unravel and expose what they did and why they did it. This is why I read off that list of departments and people who are going to jail. This is what this is looking like, and we're going to be having to take a second look at Mr. Papagalopolis. Maybe the New York Times was right. Maybe he was a lot more. Not the story that they're writing is true, that Papagalopolis was the reason for the investigation, but certainly that Papagalopolis was a much, much bigger player in all of this than we've been led to believe because of his connections to intelligence and the other people around him. He was more than just a 28-year-old campaign volunteer. He was a mole, a plant, likely a spy, maybe working for Fusion GPS, maybe working for Mr. Downer's company, maybe working for someone else, maybe the Clintons. We don't know. But we're getting mighty close to figuring all this out. mighty close.